The Cattedrale di Santa Maria del Fiore is the main church of Florence, Italy.Il Duomo di Firenze, as it is ordinarily called, was begun in 1296 in the Gothic style with the design of Arnolfo di Cambio and completed structurally in 1436 with the dome engineered by Filippo Brunelleschi. The exterior of the basilica is faced with polychrome marble panels in various shades of green and pink bordered by white and has an elaborate, 19th-century Gothic Revival façade by Emilio De Fabris. The cathedral complex, located in Piazza del Duomo, includes the Baptistery and Giotto's Campanile. These three buildings are part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site covering the historic center of Florence and are a major attraction to tourists visiting Tuscany. The basilica is one of Italy's largest churches, and until development of new structural materials in the modern era, the dome was the largest in the world. It remains the largest brick dome ever constructed. The cathedral is the mother church of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Florence, whose archbishop is currently Giuseppe Vettori. History. Santa Maria del Fiore was built on the site of an earlier cathedral dedicated to Saint Reparator. The ancient structure, founded in the early 5th century and having undergone many repairs, was crumbling with age. According to the 14th century Nuova Cronica of Giovanni Vianney, and was no longer large enough to serve the growing population of the city. Other major Tuscan cities had undertaken ambitious reconstructions of the cathedrals during the late medieval period, such as Pisa and particularly Siena, where the enormous proposed extensions were never completed. The new church was designed by Arnolfo di Cambio and approved by City Council in 1294. Di Cambio was also architect of the Church of Santa Croce and the Palazzo Vecchio. He designed three wide naves ending under the octagonal dome, with the middle nave covering the area of Santa Reparator. The first stone was laid on September 9, 1296, by Cardinal Valeriano, the first papal legate ever sent to Florence. The building of this vast project was to last 140 years. Arnolfo's plan for the eastern end, although maintained in concept, was greatly expanded in size. After Arnolfo died in 1310, work on the cathedral slowed for 30 years. When the relics of St. Zenobius were discovered in 1330 in Santa Reparator, the project gained a new impetus. In 1331, the Art della Lana, the Guild of Wool Merchants, took over patronage for the construction of the cathedral and in 1334 appointed Giotto to oversee the work. Assisted by Andrea Pisano, Giotto continued Di Cambio's design. His major accomplishment was the building of the Campanile. When Giotto died in 1337, Andrea Pisano continued the building until work was halted due to the Black Death in 1348. In 1349, work resumed on the cathedral under a series of architects, starting with Francesco Talenti, who finished the Campanile and enlarged the overall project to include the apse and the side chapels. In 1359, Talenti was succeeded by Giovanni di Lapogini, who divided the center nave in 4 square bays. Other architects were Alberto Arnoldi, Giovanni d'Ambrogio, Neri di Fioravante and Andrea Orcagna. By 1375, the old church Santa Reparator was pulled down. The nave was finished by 1380, and by 1418, only the dome remained incomplete. On the 18th of August 1418, the Art della Lana announced an architectural design competition for erecting Neri's dome. The two main competitors were two master goldsmiths, Lorenzo Ghiberti and Filippo Brunelleschi, the latter of whom was supported by Cosimo de' Medici. Ghiberti had been the winner of the competition for a pair of bronze doors for the Baptistery in 1401, and lifelong competition between the two remained sharp. Brunelleschi won and received the commission. Ghiberti, appointed coadjutor, drew a salary equal to Brunelleschi's, and, though neither was awarded the announced prize of 200 florins, was promised equal credit, although he spent most of his time on other projects. When Brunelleschi became ill, or feigned illness, the project was briefly in the hands of Ghiberti, but Ghiberti soon had to admit that the whole project was beyond him. In 1423, Brunelleschi was back in charge and took over sole responsibility. Work started on the dome in 1420 and was completed in 1436. The cathedral was consecrated by Pope Eugene IV on March 25, 1436. It was the first octagonal dome in history to be built without a temporary wooden supporting frame. It was one of the most impressive projects of the Renaissance. During the consecration in 1436, Guillaume de Fabris's motet Upper Rosarum Flores was performed. The structure of this motet was strongly influenced by the structure of the dome. The decoration of the exterior of the cathedral, begun in the 14th century, was not completed until 1887, when the polychrome marble façade was completed with the design of Emilio De Fabris. The floor of the church was relaid in marble tiles in the 16th century. The exterior walls are faced in alternate vertical and horizontal bands of polychrome marble from Carrara, Prato, Siena, Lavenza and a few other places. These marble bands had to repeat the already existing bands on the walls of the earlier adjacent baptistery, the Battistera di San Giovanni, and Giotto's bell tower. There are two side doors, the doors of the Canonici and the door of the mandorla, with sculptures by Nanni di Banco, Donatello, and Jacopo della Quercia. The 6 side windows, notable for their delicate tracery and ornaments, are separated by pilasters. Only the 4 windows closest to the transept admit light, the other 2 are merely ornamental. The clerestory windows are round, a common feature in Italian Gothic. During its long history, this cathedral has been the seat of the Council of Florence, heard the preachings of Girolamo Savonarola and witnessed the murder of Giuliano di Piero de' Medici on Sunday, the 26th of April 1478. In the Pazzi conspiracy. Exterior, plan and structure. The Cathedral of Florence is built as a basilica, having a wide central nave of 4 square bays, with an aisle on either side. The chancel and transepts are of identical polygonal plan, separated by 2 smaller polygonal chapels. The whole plan forms a Latin cross. The nave and aisles are separated by wide pointed Gothic arches resting on composite piers. The dimensions of the building are enormous. Building area 8,300 square meters, length 153 meters, width 38 meters, width at the crossing 90 meters. The height of the arches in the aisles is 23 meters. The height of the dome is 114.5 meters. Dome. By the beginning of the 15th century, after 100 years of construction, the structure was still missing its dome. The basic features of the dome had been designed by Arnolfo di Cambio in 1296. His brick model, 4.6 meters high, 9.2 meters long, was standing in a side aisle of the unfinished building, and had long been sacrosanct. It called for an octagonal dome higher and wider than any that had ever been built, with no external buttresses to keep it from spreading and falling under its own weight. The commitment to reject traditional Gothic buttresses had been made when Neri di Fioravanti's model was chosen over a competing one by Giovanni di Lapoguini. That architectural choice in 1367 was one of the first events of the Italian Renaissance, marking a break with the medieval Gothic style and a return to the classic Mediterranean dome. Italian architects regarded Gothic flying buttresses as ugly makeshifts. Furthermore, the use of buttresses was forbidden in Florence, as the style was favored by central Italy's traditional enemies to the north. Neri's model depicted a massive inner dome open at the top to admit light, like Rome's Pantheon, but enclosed in a thinner outer shell, partly supported by the inner dome, to keep out the weather. It was to stand on an unbuttressed octagonal drum. Neri's dome would need an internal defense against spreading, but none had yet been designed. The building of such a masonry dome posed many technical problems. Brunelleschi looked to the Great Dome of the Pantheon in Rome for solutions. The Dome of the Pantheon is a single shell of concrete, the formula for which had long since been forgotten. Soil filled with silver coins had held the Pantheon dome aloft while its concrete set. This could not be the solution in the case of a dome this size and would put the church out of use. For the height and breadth of the dome designed by Neri, starting 52 meters above the floor and spanning 44 meters, there was not enough timber in Tuscany to build the scaffolding and forms. Brunelleschi chose to follow such design and employed a double shell, made of sandstone and marble. Brunelleschi would have to build the dome out of brick due to its light weight compared to stone and being easier to form, and with nothing under it during construction. To illustrate his proposed structural plan, he constructed a wooden and brick model with the help of Donatello and Nanni di Banco, a model which is still displayed in the Museo dell'Opera del Duomo. The model served as a guide for the craftsman, but was intentionally incomplete, so as to ensure Brunelleschi's control over the construction. Brunelleschi's solutions were ingenious. The spreading problem was solved by a set of 4 internal horizontal stone and iron chains, serving as barrel hoops, embedded within the inner dome, one at the top, one at the bottom, with the remaining 2 evenly spaced between them. A 5th chain, made of wood, was placed between the first and second of the stone chains. Since the dome was octagonal rather than round, a simple chain, squeezing the dome like a barrel hoop, would have put all its pressure on the 8 corners of the dome. The chains needed to be rigid octagons, stiff enough to hold their shape, so as not to deform the dome as they held it together. Each of Brunelleschi's stone chains was built like an octagonal railroad track with parallel rails and cross ties, all made of sandstone beams 43 centimeters in diameter and no more than 2.3 meters long. The rails were connected end-to-end with lead-glazed iron splices. The cross ties and rails were notched together and then covered with the bricks and mortar of the inner dome. The cross ties of the bottom chain can be seen protruding from the drum at the base of the dome. The others are hidden. Each stone chain was supposed to be reinforced with a standard iron chain made of interlocking links, but a magnetic survey conducted in the 1970s failed to detect any evidence of iron chains, which, if they exist, are deeply embedded in the thick masonry walls. Brunelleschi also included vertical ribs set on the corners of the octagon, curving towards the center point. The ribs, 13 feet deep, were supported by 16 concealed ribs radiating from center. The ribs had slits to take beams that supported platforms, thus allowing the work to progress upward without the need for scaffolding. A circular masonry dome can be built without supports, called centering, because each course of bricks is a horizontal arch that resists compression. In Florence, the octagonal inner dome was thick enough for an imaginary circle to be embedded in it at each level, a feature that would hold the dome up eventually, but could not hold the bricks in place while the mortar was still wet. Brunelleschi used a herringbone brick pattern to transfer the weight of the freshly laid bricks to the nearest vertical ribs of the non-circular dome. The outer dome was not thick enough to contain embedded horizontal circles, being only 60 centimeters thick at the base and 30 centimeters thick at the top. To create such circles, Brunelleschi thickened the outer dome at the inside of its corners at 9 different elevations, creating 9 masonry rings, which can be observed today from the space between the two domes. To counteract hoop stress, the outer dome relies entirely on its attachment to the inner dome and has no embedded chains. A modern understanding of physical laws and the mathematical tools for calculating stresses were centuries in the future. Brunelleschi, like all cathedral builders, had to rely on intuition and whatever he could learn from the large-scale models he built. To lift 37,000 tons of material, including over 4 million bricks, he invented hoisting machines and Lewisons for hoisting large stones. These specially designed machines and his structural innovations were Brunelleschi's chief contribution to architecture. Although he was executing an aesthetic plan made half a century earlier, it is his name, rather than Neri's, that is commonly associated with the dome. Brunelleschi's ability to crown the dome with a lantern was questioned and he had to undergo another competition. Even though there had been evidence that Brunelleschi had been working on a design for a lantern for the upper part of the dome, the evidence is shown in the curvature, which was made steeper than the original model. He was declared the winner over his competitors Lorenzo Ghiberti and Antonio Ciarcieri. His design was for an octagonal lantern with 8 radiating buttresses and 8 high-arched windows. Construction of the lantern was begun a few months before his death in 1446. Then, for 15 years, little progress was possible. Due to alterations by several architects, the lantern was finally completed by Brunelleschi's friend Michelozzo in 1461. The conical roof was crowned with a gilt copper ball and cross, containing holy relics, by Verrocchio in 1469. This brings the total height of the dome and lantern to 114.5 meters. This copper ball was struck by lightning on the 17th of July 1600 and fell down. It was replaced by an even larger one 2 years later. The commission for this bronze ball went to the sculptor Andrea del Verrocchio, in whose workshop there was at this time a young apprentice named Leonardo da Vinci. Fascinated by Filippo's machines, which Verrocchio used to hoist the ball, Leonardo made a series of sketches of them and, as a result, is often given credit for their invention. Leonardo might have also participated in the design of the bronze ball, as stated in the G manuscript of Paris. Remember the way we soldered the ball of Santa Maria del Fiore. The decorations of the drum gallery by Baccio d'Agnolo were never finished after being disapproved by no one less than Michelangelo. A huge statue of Brunelleschi now sits outside the Palazzo dei Canonici in the Piazza del Duomo, looking thoughtfully up towards his greatest achievement, the dome that would forever dominate the panorama of Florence. It is still the largest masonry dome in the world. The building of the cathedral had started in 1296 with the design of Arnolfo di Cambio and was completed in 1469 with the placing of Verrocchio's copper ball atop the lantern. But the façade was still unfinished and would remain so until the 19th century. In popular culture, in Silence of the Lambs, Drive, Hannibal Lecter gives mention of the dome when he sees Clarice Starling admiring his many sketches, and tells her that one of them is of the Duomo, as seen from the Belvedere, which is to say, Forte Belvedere. It is interesting to note that the man Clarice is seeking, Buffalo Bill, happens to be in Belvedere, Ohio, and one wonders whether or not he is trying to give her a clue as to his whereabouts. In addition, in Hannibal, it is found that 10 years after his escape, portrayed in Silence of the Lambs, Drive, Lecter is living in Florence, and it seems strange that no one figured out that this, of all places, is where he of all people could be found, given his appreciation of fine art. Façade. The original façade, designed by Arnolfo di Cambio and usually attributed to Giotto, was actually begun 20 years after Giotto's death. A mid-15th century pen and ink drawing of the so-called Giotto's façade is visible in the Codex Rustici, and in the drawing of Bernardino Pochetti in 1587, both on display in the Museum of the Opera del Duomo. This façade was the collective work of several artists, among them Andrea Orcagna and Taddeo Gaddi. This original façade was completed in only its lower portion and then left unfinished. It was dismantled in 1587 to 1588 by the Medici court architect Bernardo Buontalenti, or ordered by Grand Duke Francesco I de' Medici, as it appeared totally outmoded in Renaissance times. Some of the original sculptures are on display in the Museum Opera del Duomo, behind the cathedral. Others are now in the Berlin Museum and in the Louvre. The competition for a new façade turned into a huge corruption scandal. The wooden model for the façade of Buontalenti is on display in the Museum Opera del Duomo. A few new designs had been proposed in later years, but the models were not accepted. The façade was then left bare until the 19th century. In 1864, a competition held to design a new façade was won by Emilio De Fabris in 1871. Work began in 1876 and was completed in 1887. This neo-Gothic façade in white, green and red marble forms a harmonious entity with the cathedral, Giotto's bell tower and the Baptistery, but some think it is excessively decorated. The whole façade is dedicated to the Mother of Christ. Main portal. The three huge bronze doors date from 1899 to 1903. They are adorned with scenes from the life of the Madonna. The mosaics in the lunettes above the doors were designed by Niccolò Barabino. They represent charity among the founders of Florentine philanthropic institutions, Christ enthroned with Mary and John the Baptist, and Florentine artisans, merchants and humanists. The pediment above the central portal contains a half-relief by Tito Sarocchi of Mary enthroned holding a flowered scepter. Giuseppe Cassioli sculpted the right-hand door. On top of the façade is a series of niches with the 12 apostles in the middle, the Madonna with child. Between the rose window and the tympanum, there is a gallery with busts of great Florentine artists. Interior. The Gothic interior is vast and gives an empty impression. The relative bareness of the church corresponds with the austerity of religious life, as preached by Girolamo Savonarola. Many decorations in the church have been lost in the course of time, or have been transferred to the Museum Opera del Duomo, such as the magnificent cantorial pulpits of Luca della Robbia and Donatello, as this cathedral was built with funds from the public. Some important works of art in this church honor illustrious men and military leaders of Florence. Dante before the city of Florence by Domenico di Michelino. This painting is especially interesting because it shows us, apart from scenes of the Divine Comedy, a view on Florence in 1465, a Florence such as Dante himself could not have seen in his time. Funerary monument to Sir John Hawkwood by Paolo Uccello. This almost monochrome fresco, transferred to canvas in the 19th century, is painted in terraverde, a color closest to the patina of bronze. Equestrian statue of Nicola da Tolentino by Andrea del Castagno. This fresco, transferred on canvas in the 19th century, in the same style as the previous one, is painted in a color resembling marble. However, it is more richly decorated and gives more the impression of movement. Both frescoes portray the condottieri as heroic figures riding triumphantly. Both painters had problems when applying in painting the new rules of perspective to foreshortening. They used two unifying points, one for the horse and one for the pedestal, instead of a single unifying point. Busts of Giotto, Brunelleschi, Marsilio Ficino, and Antonio Squarcialupi. These busts all date from the 15th and the 16th centuries. Above the main door is a colossal clock face with fresco portraits of four prophets or evangelists by Paolo Uccello. This one-handed liturgical clock shows the 24 hours of the Hora Italica, a period of time ending with sunset at 24 hours. This timetable was used until the 18th century. This is one of the few clocks from that time that still exist and are in working order. The church is particularly notable for its 44 stained glass windows, the largest undertaking of this kind in Italy in the 14th and 15th century. The windows in the aisles and in the transept depict saints from the Old and the New Testament, while the circular windows in the drum of the dome or above the entrance depict Christ and Mary. They are the work of the greatest Florentine artists of the times, such as Donatello, Lorenzo Ghiberti, Paolo Uccello and Andrea del Castagno. Christ crowning Mary as Queen. The stained glass circular window above the clock with a rich range of coloring was designed by Gaddo Gaddi in the early 14th century. Donatello designed the stained glass window in the drum of the dome. The beautiful funeral monument of Antonio d'Orso, Bishop of Florence, was made by Tino da Camino, the most important funeral sculptor of his time. The monumental crucifix, behind the bishop's chair at the high altar, is by Benedetto da Armeano. The choir enclosure is the work of the famous Bartolomeo Bandinelli. The 10-paneled bronze doors of the sacristy were made by Luca della Robbia, who has also two glazed terracotta works inside the sacristy: Angel with Candlestick and Resurrection of Christ. In the back of the middle of the three apses is the altar of St. Zanobius, first Bishop of Florence. Its silver shrine, a masterpiece of Ghiberti, contains the urn with his relics. The central compartment shows us his miracles, the reviving of a dead child. Above this shrine is the painting Last Supper by the lesser-known Giovanni Balducci. There was also a glass-paste mosaic panel, the bust of St. Zanobius by the 16th-century miniaturist Monte di Giovanni, but it is now on display in the Museum Opera del Duomo. Many decorations date from the 16th-century patronage of the Dukes, such as the pavement in colored marble, attributed to Baccio d'Agnola and Francesco da Sangalo. Some pieces of marble from the façade were used topside down in the flooring. It was suggested that the interior of the 45 meters wide dome should be covered with a mosaic decoration to make the most of the available light, coming through the circular windows of the drum and through the lantern. Brunelleschi had proposed the vault to glimmer with resplendent gold, but his death in 1446 put an end to this project, and the walls of the dome were whitewashed. Grand Duke Cosimo I de' Medici decided to have the dome painted with a representation of the Last Judgment. This enormous work, 3,600 meters squared of painted surface, was started in 1568 by Giorgio Vasari and Federico Zuccari and would last till 1579. The upper portion, near the lantern, representing the 24 elders of APOC 4 was finished by Vasari before his death in 1574. Federico Zuccari and a number of collaborators, such as Domenico Cresti, finished the other portions. Choirs of angels, Christ, Mary and saints, virtues, gifts of the Holy Spirit and beatitudes, and at the bottom of the cupola, capital sins and hell. These frescoes are considered Zuccari's greatest work, but the quality of the work is uneven because of the input of different artists on the different techniques. Vasari had used true fresco, while Zuccari had painted in secco. During the restoration work, which ended in 1995, the entire pictorial cycle of the Last Judgment was photographed with specially designed equipment and all the information collected in a catalogue. All the restoration information along with reconstructed images of the frescoes were stored and managed in the Thesaurus Florentinus computer system. Crypt. The cathedral underwent difficult excavations between 1965 and 1974. The subterranean vaults were used for the burial of Florentine bishops. Throughout the centuries, the archaeological history of this huge area was reconstructed through the work of Dr. Franklin Toka. Remains of Roman houses, and early Christian pavement, ruins of the former Cathedral of Santa Reparata and successive enlargements of this church. Close to the entrance, in the part of the crypt open to the public, is the tomb of Brunelleschi. While its location is prominent, the actual tomb is simple and humble. That the architect was permitted such a prestigious burial place is proof of the high esteem he was given by the Florentines. Also buried in the former Cathedral of Santa Reparata was Conrad II of Italy, but his wife was laid down to rest with him.